If you like this podcast, give us a follow, subscribe, like. Appreciate all those things. Comment on our videos if you feel like they've been helpful to you. Thank you very much, everybody. David, good afternoon. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Alex.
I'm really excited to talk to you. You deal in a couple of different areas that I have interest in: leadership, business, education. But with that, why don't you maybe just tell me a little bit about yourself, and then I'd like to go back to the beginning and hear how you kind of got into that.
Yeah, great. Well, I'd like to introduce myself as a banker turned educator turned entrepreneur. And I think
Mm.
that always provides some interesting stories. But yeah, I have started over 10 schools now, award winning schools that are reimagining the paradigm of education, primarily public education. Yeah.
Where are those schools mostly based?
Oh, they are in California. Yeah. Most
All,
of them are in the
all
San
of.
Francisco Bay Area,
Oh,
and some of them are in Sacramento.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I did that for a long time, and then I moved into consulting and started doing leadership consulting, life coaching, had a real interesting journey with mindfulness and meditation that helped me. Did a men's group. I did, different type of leadership groups that are kind of leadership slash life. So had a lot of different interesting endeavors, and I'm really now working on opening this new thing called micro schools, which we can talk about, and I'm helping others. It's kind of like a business in a box concept to help others across the country and ultimately the world open micro schools.
Mm, interesting. What was life as a banker like? Why didn't you stick in that career?
Well, I graduated from college and went into education like right out of college and was a teacher. I was a Spanish teacher part time. And it was really, really hard, like without any training. So I didn't need a certification because I was part time teacher. And it was incredibly difficult. I always tell people you need to be a waiter and a teacher, like at least
Mm,
once in your life to really understand some of the most difficult jobs. But yeah, so being a teacher was really hard that first time. And then I always had this business kind of entrepreneurial side, and I'd worked in banks. I put myself through college as a bank teller. And
mm.
so I ended up in DC and I needed a job. And I was, temping and doing free internships. I just needed like a stable job. We'd just gotten married. And so I got into this corporate institutional banking 2 blocks from the White House. And at that point, my family's like, yeah, you made it. Like, you're doing great. You got the job, 3-piece suit. You're on the track. I was on the management track. Like, the director had taken me aside and said, hey, we want you to be the next director. I'm retiring. Everything looked great on the outside, but I was really miserable. I just wasn't happy.
Mm.
And I ended up quitting that job and deciding when I turned 30, actually, I quit that job and decided that I was going to become a public school teacher in an urban high school in Oakland, California.
So you start as a teacher, leave to become a banker, and then you're thinking, all right, I'm going to go back to a teacher.
Yep.
What year was the teaching? Because I only asked that not to date you, but I have a lot of friends that are teachers and I overhear what it's like nowadays, but I'm
Yeah.
kind of wondering what it was like at that point in time.
Yeah. So I was first started out in the late 90s and then came back in 2005. And so it's very different than it was 20 years ago when I was a teacher, like very different.
Yeah, well, late 90s, no cell phone. 2005, really even no cell phones either.
Yeah,
They were probably starting to come online, but
exactly. It's a very different world in terms of technology.
so you said banking felt a little soulless for you. What was it? What were you feeling that made you think, "Hey, this is all working financially as a career, but I can't do it." And I imagine your friends told you, "David, don't leave a high-paying banking job to go become a teacher. That's a ridiculous idea."
That's exactly yeah, you predicted that one. Yeah, not only my friends, but my family. I was the first one in my family to go to college. I was like the guy who'd succeeded. So my family was actually very upset with me because they're like, you're supposed to be our financial bedrock. And public
Mm.
school teachers make 37,000 a year. So what's going on here, dude? So I really felt like the banking industry for me, I actually think I would have been perfectly fine there, but I'm not really one to accept mediocrity. I really wanted to challenge myself to do what I really loved. And I just always had this calling for service and teaching. And I really felt like there was this moment that if I didn't jump when I was 30, my wife and I had been married a couple years, the kids were on their way. I just kind of felt like that would be my life. And I remember several conversations because, like you, I like to talk to people and, ask questions to mentors and stuff. So I asked a lot of the kind of like 40, 50-year-old banker guys that were executives and stuff. I grabbed them and be like, hey, tell me what you love about your job, why you went into this bank. And all of them kind of had a similar story, which is like, I just kind of fell into it. I really like that I'm off at 501. I really like corporate banking because it's not like investment banking. You only work 40 hours. Like it was the answers were very mediocre. And
Mm.
it just, I saw them as my future. And I thought, this is not where I want to go. Like I want them to say, oh my gosh, I love this job. I have a passion for banking and how we serve people and how we help people. And I just wanted those types of answers, and nobody was giving me those answers. It was more like the benefits are good, the schedule's good, and I get home, I have a good weekend.
Why do you think you weren't finding those answers that you were looking for?
Well, I probably wasn't asking the right people, and it was number one. Number two, I think it was clear that I didn't want to be there. So I was probably looking for the people to give me those answers. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that worked at that bank that were really happy and had those types of answers, but I don't think I wanted to be there. I knew my soul really knew intuitively that it was time to take the leap. I mean, I knew it when I first graduated from college. Like I was meant to be a teacher, and even at
Mm.
the bank, I was like mentoring everybody, and I was teaching English after school. I was coaching basketball. Like that's what really lit me up. That's where my passion was.
Mm. I'm sure you know a little bit about the history of banking, but this monolithic banks, like your Chases
Hmm.
and your Bank of Americas being these multi-trillion-dollar banks, that's really kind of a new thing. And what I found to be interesting was community banking used to be the way that all loans got done. So
Mm,
David would come into my bank and, oh yeah, yeah, I know David. He coaches the baseball
yeah,
team.
yeah,
And, he's a good guy. "Oh, David, you wanna do a loan? You wanna start a coffee shop? Okay, well, do you have any collateral? Okay, you got a house? Alright, well, I know that area. I know where your house is. So that's probably a good area, and that house is probably worth what you're assuming it's worth. So yeah, let's do the loan. Because not only were you helping yourself as a banker, because you might make some interest, but you actually were community building along the same time. So the stronger the
yeah,
community bank, the stronger the community would be. So it was really like a piece of source of pride. And then through various different legislations and downturns, a lot of these banks went out of business
yeah,
and we're not able to weather the storms that these bigger banks were able to weather. And then Dodd-Frank was a whole nother thing after the 2008 financial crisis. So yeah, I wonder if that's part of it, that you didn't really have a connection anymore to the people that you were serving. It more so felt like we're some big bank and we're just
exactly.
in it to peel off 2% month over month.
Actually, right after I left that bank, I worked every bank I worked at within like 2 or 3 years was acquired by a bigger fish. So like I
There's
worked at small banks in the summer, and they got acquired by medium sized banks, and then that one in DC actually got acquired by PNC,
yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah, there's been an enormous amount of roll up in the banking sector. If anybody wants to look at some crazy graphs, you can look at like the graphs that show, as you shift to the right, the consolidation, and it all leads to like Bank of America, Chase,
yep,
Wells Fargo. It's
Wells Fargo.
crazy.
And I actually worked at Wells Fargo in the 90s. That's where I spent all of my college career as a teller, paying my bills through that. It was a great opportunity as a college student. But when I was at Wells Fargo in the 90s, it was just in California. And it was like a
Mm.
regional bank, and it was super innovative. It's actually in Good to Great, they write about that Wells Fargo that I worked at in the 90s. And
Oh.
yeah, and then when I was there, I think it was like 96, the First Interstate Wells Fargo purchased First Interstate, and then they were bought, then Wells Fargo bought like a big, some mortgage banks in like Minnesota or something. Anyway, they went from one state to 13 to 32 in the 7 years that I was there in the
Well,
90s.
well, what year was the big controversy with Wells Fargo where they were
That was
uh,
like 5 or 10 years ago. That was way after I left in 2000. So, but
you
yeah, but
had
it's
nothing to do with that at
like,
all,
of
to be
course.
clear.
But I
Uh,
mean, in all seriousness, when I talk about Wells Fargo, like I have very fond memories. And that's why I always say before they got really big, to your point about the monolithic banks, like that controversy happened once they became one of the big five banks. But the Wells Fargo I worked at in the 90s was actually a pretty cool place.
Yeah, 2016, revealing
There you
employees at San Francisco-based bank had opened up millions of fraudulent accounts
go. Yep.
to meet sales goals. They didn't specifically say that it was in San Francisco this happens, just it was a San
Yeah.
Francisco-based bank.
Yeah.
But, yeah, all those companies, once they get big, you just and I feel for them because we were
Yeah.
just my business. My business is 35 people, which is for a lot of people, that's like, "Oh, geez, that's a big business." If you put yourself in the shoes of someone who owns a 35 person business, you're like, geez, that would be kind of crazy. But
Yeah.
then you hear it and like, and just on the outside, like 35 people, that's nothing. Like when do they consider it not a small business? Something ridiculous like 500 employees in the United
Right.
States.
Right.
Geez, like you're telling me a company that's 490 employees is a small business? I'm thinking
That's
no,
funny.
but nonetheless, banking's another crazy one that I can't possibly imagine how you start a bank, and a school is an interesting one that I think. How would you even begin to open a school? So I know we're not there yet, but I
Yeah.
want to answer that question. So you go back into teaching after your
Yeah.
time in the banking sector. What's that transition like? And if you mind me asking, what was that paid drop off like?
Oh,
Because
no problem. I always share that part of the story. It was a humongous pay drop, and I ended up going to Stanford University, which because I really wanted to do education policy, and because I was in DC, and
got it,
I
got it.
chose Stanford because they had a teaching certification and a master. So I thought, well, I guess if I want to tell people how to run a school and how to change education, I need to actually be a teacher for at least a few years. So that was kind of the rationale, and then of course not, of course, but I fell in love with teaching. Like I said, I knew that was something that I wanted to do, and worked with high school kids and absolutely loved it. And the transition was pretty hard. Like I remember my first week in grad school and just kind of like rolling my eyes a lot. Like after being in business for so many years, it was like, what is going on here? This is crazy town.
Mm.
Just so different. And then after a while, I would say it was much softer. It was all about like community building and getting to know each other. And we were like playing games and stuff. I just come from corporate banking in DC, so it was a very kind of like rocky transition. But by like the seventh day of being in a classroom, I felt at home. I was like, okay, I love this. I can really be like that playful self that I love to be, and have fun with teenagers. Are super fun. Their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. They're free. They're like trying to figure out the world. So I kind of fell in love with that aspect. And then, like I always tell people, when you follow your calling, things really kind of fall into place. So I ended up going into the charter school movement in the early 2000s, which is pretty nascent at that point. It was like 5 years in, and was in the
Mm.
right place, right time, and ended up with an organization. I went from teacher to principal to assistant superintendent, and we started 10 schools in 5 years. And by the time I left, we had gotten a $50 million check from Zuckerberg. So we had
Whoa.
really done a great job, and we grew really fast, and we had tons of success. We were ranked number 10 in the state of California, number 50 in the top, there's like 74 top 100 in the US by Newsweek magazine and US News and World Report. So we kind of made it, and we were excited, and that was the path. Because I left the bank and I had found the right path, it was a great decision for me.
So what's the difference between a charter school, a public school, a private school? Maybe just break those down for me.
Um, we all know the traditional public school because that's most of us attended that school, right? So that's the district school. Yeah, right. And the majority of the country, it's like 90% attend like a government funded, a government public school, right? And that is, that one. It's your elementary school around the corner. It's a junior high. It's high school, and that's funded in the state of California. That's funded based on attendance, and it's per pupil allocation. So if somebody shows up for 36 minutes, then you get a certain amount of money for them that day, and that's how you get your revenue. That's
Whoa.
yeah, exactly.
Wait, so how are they tracking how long the kid's there for?
If you show up for 36 minutes or more, then the secretary gets to put down that you were present, and then that counts as attendance for the day.
That doesn't sound likely to encourage fraud at all.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
I have no idea how it works in the state of Ohio. All
I
I
think most
knew
states use that
is
formula. Yeah.
like property taxes. Property
Yes.
taxes go to the schools.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that's your public school that we all know, and we can talk about that. And then the charter school movement kind of came out as a response to the fact that there's talk about like a monopoly. There wasn't any competition other than your private schools, but your private schools are usually for the top 3%, right? They're only a certain percentage of people can afford those schools. So 97% of kids have to end up in a public school, which
What's
means there's
the
really no competition. Yeah.
what's the cost of a private school these days?
The average cost for a high school is around 20 grand, and the average cost for a elementary, like kindergarten through eighth grade, would be about 15 or 20, excuse me, 15,000.
When my kids are 6, 7, 8 years old, just throw them into the public school, man. I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make when they're that age, but I would
Yeah.
defer to you on that, actually.
Yeah, yeah, we can talk about that too, like the difference between private and public schools and whether you're, 20 grand per kid, especially at 4 kids, that's 80 grand a year for an elementary school. It's gonna be
That's crazy. That's
really
an
crazy, right?
enormous amount of money.
Yeah, yeah. So the charter schools were really it was kind of an idea of how do we create some competition in the marketplace
Okay.
to give families choice about where they could go to school. And it actually started in Minnesota with a pretty left-leaning like union-based charter school, and then 5 years later it was like the right wing that were supporting this because they wanted to have smaller government and have schools that were actually anybody could go to. So that's charter schools. Now charter schools are funded by the state and the federal government, and it's very similar to a traditional public school. It's based on attendance and it's based on how many kids you have in the school.
So let's say I live in Columbus, Ohio,
Yep.
and there's my public school, which generally, if this was 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I would just automatically be going to that school. I
Yeah.
remember when I was a kid, there was another school across town, but we weren't in that district, and it was like sort of an innovative thing that they were gonna allow some swapping of kids. So, what hey, if
Yes.
12 kids from your district wanna come to our school and 14 from yours wanna vice versa, well, okay, we those 12 cancel out, and then I don't know how they would work those final differences in numbers. That was discussed. I don't think it ever happened
Okay.
because some of my friends that I played club soccer with were like, "Come to our school.
Oh yeah.
We'll create a super soccer team."
Right. Right.
Which I don't think it actually worked out and happened. They were like, "How do we get the busing to work? How do these
Mm,
kids
okay.
still get access to the school?"
Yeah.
But if there's a charter in my general area, then I could choose to basically spend my tax dollars there. Is that how that's functionally working?
That's That's how it functionally works. Now, if there are more, it has to be open to everyone because it's publicly funded. And if there's more students than seats, so let's say you're taking 200 kids and there's 220 applications, then you have to do a public lottery, like a random lottery. So there are
Okay.
some kind of controls for creating a more, like making it open to everybody.
So I'm gonna imagine when you open this charter school, especially if there's maybe a school that's not so great, like we know that, "Oh, well, this school's not the greatest school," then
Mhm.
instantly there's gonna be a flood of kids that wanna go to the charter school, correct?
Yeah, that's correct, and that's what happened to us in the Bay Area. We were in kind of around Redwood City, like an area that was pretty at like one side of the freeway had the affluent schools, and literally the east side of the freeway had the not so affluent, like the lower income. And we went into the lower income communities and had a waiting list of 500 kids.
Right. So can you just explain kind of how historically that property tax valuation thing has worked and why that's caused some of these, like you said, cross, I don't know if you said the river or the highway, but cross this small area, there's a super nice school and there's a super downtrodden school, and you could maybe throw a baseball between those two.
Yeah, so I don't know enough about outside of California, but I can tell you in general what I know, and then we can always kind of just assume generally. But generally, what happens is because the funding of the school is based on the property taxes. If you're in, like, for example, the area I'm talking about, the one side of the freeway is like the people that invest in Silicon Valley startups. So we're talking
Hmm.
about $100
Right.
million, like they don't even invest in an industry unless it's over 50 billion, right? So we're talking about very rich people. Literally 3 miles across the street, there's a house that might sell for $100,000, right? So their house is selling for 10 million across the freeway. It's 100,000. It's only 3 miles. So you can do some simple math there on what percentage of the tax revenue is going to which school. And then in addition to that, the schools that are in the nicer areas, the parent fundraising can be like $1 million, 500,000, a lot.
Interesting.
So they're funding the music and the arts, and they're funding all these enhancements, and the kids that are across the way are not getting those extra enhancements. And you're also talking about the fact that you can't afford to pay teachers as much. So
I
typically
was gonna say, yeah, that's a problem because then let's say I'm actually a great teacher. I don't wanna go to that downtrodden school because not only am I gonna get paid less, there's gonna be just, like,
it's hard.
more stuff to deal with. There might be kids with drugs or guns or
Yeah,
fights, or there
yeah,
might be danger.
yeah,
So why would I wanna go to this school? So you're getting teachers who are maybe, I don't wanna say not as good, but they don't have as many options because,
yeah,
all things being equal, you're gonna go to the school that's nicer, better
yeah,
air conditioned, better food. Kids are gonna be a little more polite. the school, there might be a weight room you can go work out in. All
Yeah.
things being equal, it's gonna be just a lot better experience. Plus,
Yeah, typically exactly. Typically, that's how it works out, but you do get the kind of champions and people that are crazy like me that wanted to go into an urban school because I was that kid that didn't have a lot of money and always went to, like, the crappy school, so I wanted to help kids like me, right? So, I wanted to go into those schools, but it was so hard to stay
yeah.
because the salary was low and the working conditions were not great, as you talked about. That's why I fell in love with the charter movement because like, for example, my salary my first year as a teacher in Oakland in the public school district in this urban school we're talking about was 37,000 a year, right? And this is mid 2000s, so now that would be a little bit more, but still, it was a very low salary,
Well,
and
California too. In the state of
in the
Ohio,
Bay
that's
Area, yeah,
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 yeah.
in the Bay Area, I mean, an entry level salary is like 80 grand now. I think just right out of college. So we're talking very low salary for the Bay Area, and to go into the charter school that I had to drive 30 minutes to get to, but it was a charter school. It was 57,000. So I just got a $20,000 raise by going from the public school to the charter school with the exact same kids that I would be able to serve. And the working conditions were better and it was a smaller and we tried to, solve for a lot of the problems that the bigger schools couldn't solve for. And when you have kids with that much trauma, that many needs, you can't have 2,000 students. You need a smaller school, stuff like that.
Now, this may be a dumb question, but your example was the charter school can hold 200 kids. I don't know if that's like a realistic number, but I imagine you don't open a charter school and then on day 1, you're like, "We can take 3,000 kids." I imagine you kinda starts just like any
You
other.
wanna grow slowly,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
because as you know from business and culture, that culture is everything, and so with kids, it's the same way. So we would actually do smaller high schools, we'd do 400 students in a high school,
'Kay.
and we would grow 100 at a time. So we'd go ninth grade, and then every year we'd add a grade and add a ninth
Oh,
grade, so
oh,
yeah,
that's interesting. So, but what I was gonna ask is,
yeah,
what I guess I don't understand is if there's a public school, maybe even again, in a bad area,
yeah,
but let's say they do have 2,000 kids. I don't know if that's like a realistic
that's
number.
pretty normal, yeah,
But like a big 2,000 kid school. So you have 1/5 of the enrollment that they do. How is it possible that you're making, I'm doing air quotes, making
yeah,
more money than them when they have 2,000 kids? Even if they have terrible attendance, I have to
yeah,
imagine they have more kids attending than you.
yeah.
But is it a tax-based thing? That's where I'm not following.
Okay, yeah, so, well, if you just think about simple numbers, so actually the way and the American high school was built is to have about 3 to 4,000 students in a high school. So a
Jeez.
smaller high school would be like 1 to 2,000, like in a smaller suburban community. But in like New York and the kind of bigger cities or San Francisco, you're going to have about 4,000 in a school.
'Kay.
So what we would do is we would be more efficient with our funds
Okay.
first, but that wasn't like the biggest reason. The biggest reason was because we didn't have to hire as many teachers and we didn't have to have as big of a building. So they have 4,000. They're running like a huge, like you were just talking about, they're running like a big business. They
Yeah.
have 200 teachers. They have, I don't know, 10 security guards. They have 10 counsel. Like it's just, there's so much complexity. So we would just simplify that complexity. We would spend majority of our money on teacher salaries and like actual FaceTime, like every our value was this money has to be going directly to the students, like to the time you spend with students. So it's not a security guard, it's not all of these kind of things that we saw as like wasted money. So we're just more efficient with our money and more values aligned, which allowed us to do. I mean, one of our core values was do more with less. So we would
Mhm.
we would pay our teachers more, but we wouldn't waste money on all these other things because we had shrunk the problem down and shrunk the complexities by having a smaller school.
So your school is still getting paid the same amount per student at
Mhm.
that 2, 3, 4,000 person school, but you're
Yeah.
just more efficient with whatever you're getting paid per student.
It's actually less. It's, about 70 cents on the dollar for a charter school because we don't
Oh,
have the resources to apply for the big grants. And, some of these big grants that the districts are getting, they have like 3 employees that are just filling out reports for the federal government. So as a result, most charter schools get anywhere from 70 to 80 cents on the dollar. So we're doing it for less money and getting better results. And it's because we're just more efficient with the money and because we're running it like a small business.
uh,
And again, it's the values. It's not a government school. It's like you have a mission and a vision, you have values, you find great people, and you find people that are, bought into the cause, which is why I was excited to do it as somebody who, had left banking. Like this had to be worth it for me to go into education. So I was like, yeah, I'm down with cause. That's why we're able to sell Zuckerberg and his wife because you could feel the culture. You could see how we were changing kids' lives.
So, last stupid question about the funding and finance side of this thing.
It's okay.
But again, we've got our nice school on one side of the railroad tracks, our not so nice school, charter school notwithstanding.
Yep.
What is the difference then in the amount of money that they're getting? Because I'm assuming they're also still getting, is this state run or is this like county tax basis run per student? County tax basis run per student.
It's typically a mix of local, state, and federal funding. And so, again, because a lot of the state funding is based, not a lot, the state funding is based on property taxes, you're going to get less money if you're in in not as nice of an area.
I see. So maybe this is a stupid solution, but David, couldn't I take all property taxes essentially for the state of California and then pay them back equally to the students as opposed to kind of unfair, disproportionate, like
I mean, it's very logical, but let's talk about local politics. So that'd be like saying we're going to just share our taxes across the east part of town and the west part of town. So you're talking about NIMBY, like not in my backyard. So with school district, zoning and redlining and all the things they do, it's like you really make sure that your kids get the best education. And that means that you're not willing to share resources with the kids on the other side of the tracks. Difficult to get that
I
passed.
I look, I pay, income taxes in the state of California. I've been to California one time,
Wow.
and I'm pissed about it, David. Let me tell you, because
You should be.
it's 13%, whereas
Oh,
the state of Ohio is 4. So you get to deduct that 4%, but I'm paying that difference out to the state of California. And
yep.
so I don't know if that's going to the education system, but if so, you're welcome, my brother. But I get it because that I feel like that's bullshit. I'm like, I'm not getting a benefit from this. So
Yeah.
I guess I could understand it,
Yeah.
but
Makes
it just seems like a pretty simple solution that if instead of area by area we're paying out, that we could potentially just distribute it a little bit better. Obviously, the charter school solution seems to also work, but
Yeah. And there have been some, like in California with Governor Jerry Brown, he actually, because he was into the charter schools and into education. So he kind of made it a little more fair. Like you get more money if you, what he does, you get more money if you have English learners or more kids that are getting free and reduced lunch. So it's like the kids that have more needs, you get more money. So that does help in California, but it doesn't really close the gap. It just helps.
I gotcha. Okay, so how did you get connected with this charter school? It sounds like that was, I don't wanna say, like, an awesome situation, very
It
fun,
was an awesome
almost
situation.
almost exactly what you were looking for, a way to do education differently.
Yeah, it was what I was looking for because it was doing education differently. We had a belief that every child could, succeed at a high level regardless of their background, which was obviously what I went into education for. And I actually just found it from a friend of mine from grad school that we would go out and have a drink and I'd be telling him about what I was dealing with and he'd be like, "Oh, it's opposite at my school." And just every time I just got annoyed at him. I'm like, "Just stop. Like you're getting annoying, And it's one of those things where like, "Wait, why am I not working there?" He's like, "I don't know. Why don't you apply next year?" So
Mm,
that's how I found it, and it was just great because in those 9 years I was there and talk about professional growth, I went from teaching in the classroom to opening several schools to training everybody how to open the schools to learning how to, manage huge budgets and politics. Getting a charter school opened is super political. So I
mm.
my resume went from like banker to teacher to full on entrepreneur and like all the skills you can imagine, building a culture, like all the things you can imagine about building a business. I learned in those 9 years.
What does it take to open a school?
Okay, so if you're talking about, I want to talk to you about micro schools, but before I get there, let's talk about opening a traditional school or a charter school, and then we'll talk about micro schools. So, interesting enough, you're not going to be surprised by this, but opening a traditional school sometimes can take about 10 years
I believe it.
because yeah, because there's a lot of bureaucratic red tape. There's a lot of political hurdles. There's a lot of disagreements about who should get the money, where the money should go, zoning laws. There's so many things. You're building these huge buildings. You got to deal with space and, air pollution and parking and neighborhoods. It's just a whole situation. And so that's normal, right? Like, okay, we're going to open a school in our community. It's going to take 10 years. Yeah.
That may be a stupid question, but who decides that they wanna open, like, a school, like a traditional school? Is it some parent goes like, "There's just not enough schools in this area," and they go gung ho on that? How does that even work?
No, that's actually, I'm glad you asked that question because we can compare how a traditional school works with a micro school and a charter school. So with a traditional school, it's kind of like, we have moved into a more like, think about content, right? It used to be that you had to have, if you wanted to produce content, you had to go through some sort of gatekeepers, right? Like, just simple. Now we have YouTube, and you can go and you can put your video up, and like what we're doing right now, right? There's not all these people deciding what we get to say and when we say it and how long it's going to take to produce it. And so that's kind of the way a traditional school works. Like, we're going to open a school if the mayor, the superintendent, whoever the local actors are, the guy who has the most money is going to go and talk to the mayor and the superintendent and city council, and they're going to then decide that we need a school. Or it could be part of like a development project, like we have a huge neighborhood, suburban neighborhood being built, and now we need schools. So
Mm,
the city council and the planning commission is going to make sure there's a school coming. And then, so it was very political, and like I said, it still is. If it opens, it's a long drawn out process.
interesting. Okay. So then a charter school seems like when did that become a thing in California? Around the same time that you got involved in it?
Yeah, late 90s. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was, it passed in Minnesota, I wanna say 95 and or 94, and then California was like 95, and then by 2000, there was, it was like, now it's about 10% of the market share, so 10% of California students attend a charter school.
And do most states now allow charter schools?
A pretty large majority, I wanna say about 35 states, there's still what's that, about 15 that don't have charter laws, but most of them have some type of charter school law.
What's the argument against a charter school?
The biggest argument is that you are taking money from the public system. That's kind of the number one argument, meaning that the public schools aren't going to do well because of the fact that we had 100 kids that are now going over to your charter school. That's, well, let's use LA Unified as the example. LA Unified, Los Angeles Unified is, I think, the second biggest district in the country.
Okay.
And in terms of numbers of students, one third of those students over the last 15 years have gone to charter schools. So you're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars that have left that public entity of LA Unified School District. So
Mm,
philosophically, I don't have a problem with that, because my belief is that the money should follow the family, and it should follow the kid, and the family should have the choice to decide where they want their kid to be educated. But depending on your politics and your philosophy, and some people would say, well, if you keep doing that, then there won't be a public school district for all kids. And I would say, well, then let's figure out a solution where all kids can get a great school instead of doing what we're doing because it's not working.
mm. Okay. That makes sense that if for some reason you have a belief in the public educational
Yeah,
system, then you wouldn't want it to go away.
of course.
I don't know how popular that opinion is in 2024 that the public
It's
education
changing.
system is kick ass and it's
Yeah, it's
awesome and
changing.
it's churning out like little geniuses that are prepared for
Yeah,
the world. I mean, the joke is like they didn't teach us how to do taxes, but I know the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the South. And that
exactly.
was like literally my high school experience. I'm not saying it was a bad experience,
Yeah,
but I
it's
cannot re
outdated.
I really can't remember almost anything that I
Yeah,
learned while I was in high school. It was more like socialization and
yeah,
behavior and
yeah,
ability to just, like, prove you can do, like, some general tasks along
yeah,
a generic timeline.
yeah. That's kind of the I call the public high school diploma now like a GED equivalent. It's like you can take some basic tests, you got some basic knowledge. Most of it's outdated, most of it you're not going to use. But let me tell you about micro schools, 'cause I think that's an interesting kind of comparison and contrast to what we're talking about here. So charter schools can be opened by a group of parents, right? Like, we get a group of parents together, we get a petition, we can now go and apply to the school district and get them to authorize our charter petition, and now we can get funding from the pass-through funding that goes from the state to the district to our charter school. So that's how we did it in the charter school world. Now in micro schools, there's a similar thing happening. They're very small, and they're being opened by parents and disillusioned educators, meaning like they want to leave the public system. And in the
Mm,
last 10 years, the folks, the school choice folks that really believe the money should follow the students, should follow the family, and like you said, your taxpayer should go, money should go where you want. They have been trying to pass legislation to get public funding like vouchers or education savings accounts. And they've been having a lot of trouble getting those passed. But something changed in the last 2 years. So now there are 33 states with some type of legislation where you could take your, like, I'm opening a micro school in Phoenix, Arizona for this one, mainly this reason, because you can take the funding, you can fill out a form, you get a debit card, and you get between $8,000 and $10,000 to spend on a private school, an after school program, whatever you want for your child, and that's public funding. So now if you're trying to open a micro school, it's a small business, maybe you're just gonna have 50 kids, that's why it's micro,
Mhm.
and you don't have to build a huge building. You can just go lease an empty office space that, people are working from home now. You could do an agreement with a church because they only use it at night and on the Sundays. And within like 3 months, you could open a micro school, and it could be opened by people in your community. And you could go get 50 kids that and you could create a micro school. And it's happening really fast and it's growing. It's like 2% of the market share right now. And it's predicted to be at about 10% in the next 5 years. That's how quickly it's growing.
That's fascinating. The economics of that, 10,000 bucks times 50 kids, there's 500 grand a year, 2 or 3 teachers plus some overhead, like, that's
Yep,
gonna make a little bit of money, if not break even.
exactly. And that's what people are finding, and they're not opening micro schools to actual profit. They're opening micro schools because they're teachers that are tired of the big system, or their parents that are tired of seeing their kids come home every day depressed and not really learning much. And so it's catching on really really fast because of the pandemic. The pandemic spurred it on, and then these 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 legislative bills that were sitting there just stalling. They couldn't get them through to get them passed. All of a sudden, they started catching on and they started passing really quickly. And then Arizona, not surprisingly, like literally the wild, wild west, they have the freest version of the law, meaning like the school doesn't have to be accredited. They don't like double check all these other things. So there's some benefits and trade offs to that. But it means that you could open a micro school with an amazing teacher, and they could do what they're doing with their one classroom and do it in a smaller building and not have to worry about all of the problems with a big school and all of the red tape, bureaucracy, and all the issues that you deal with in a that big school.
Did I just hear you say they don't have to be accredited?
Yep.
So, Alex could open a micro school, and if I could get even 5 kids, that's 50 grand, like, that's enough for some people to make a living.
Yeah.
And how are they, like, checking to see if I'm, like, doing anything with these kids, or if I'm just, like, we're backpacking in the Phoenix desert, or, like, doing whatever we want, essentially,
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest that's the most controversial part of the legislation. However,
which I'm cool with. I will say, like,
figured you would be.
if you as a parent want your kid, like, hey, I think that being outdoors is, like, super important, and I want my son to learn about the world,
Yeah.
and I think hiking and doing hard things are really important,
Yeah.
and maybe along the way, like, Alex is gonna teach him some stuff about science, and he's gonna have some philosophical discussions, like, if that's good by you as a parent, I'm cool with you being allowed to send your kid to that. It's your kid. As
Well,
long
and
as
that's
you're
what I was
comfortable
going
with
to
it.
say next. Yeah, that's what I was going to say next is I feel like we have to really trust the parents. We always talk about who's their first teacher, right? It's the parent. And so we have to trust parents to be able to make the best choices for their kids. And if the school was terrible, if it didn't work, I mean, the market corrects itself. You're not going to have a terrible school and these families just continually showing up every day. So they're going to vote with their feet. And but on that note, like I do think there should be some level of regulation and kind of like checking to make sure, like there obviously safety and security and make sure teacher getting background. There's all those kind of safeguards, but I think there's a whole kind of machine industry around accreditation where it's like nothing about the accreditation process actually really means that your school is better or not. It's just become a huge kind of like business, and
Oh,
they make you jump
interesting.
through hoops and do all these crazy things. And so I think there's ways that you could actually, through the parents and through, like the teachers and the parents are not going to stay around for a terrible school. It's going to close. And so it's going to work itself out.
Sorry that my mind goes to fraud again, but what would stop me from saying, "Hey, send your kid to my school and I'll kick you back 2 or 3 grand."
Yes. Well, I think that's where the actual legislation is going in terms of the regulation and like checking up, and they do like spot checks. And I think there's a bunch of things. I mean, it's only been around for like a year now, or maybe like 1 or 2 years. So that's what they're gonna have to figure out. And I think that is the risk of like taxpayer money going out there and that there's fraud. But there's mechanisms to check that. But I don't know if it's like foolproof right now. And that's the biggest criticism of this Arizona legislation. So the other states are doing it a little more, taking a little more cautionary approach.
Interesting. What about testing, standardized testings? Is there in that state or other states, you're shaking your head, no
Most
standardized
of them do
testing?
not. Yeah, most of these education savings accounts do not require state testing. They don't. And that's because if you talk to most educators and most parents today, they're really tired of the whole testing bureaucracy and like just state testing and testing and testing and testing. It's just become totally out of hand.
Why is that, shifted? When I was a kid, I had to take the OGT. I had to
Mhm.
take the Ohio graduation test, and it was not very hard, I will say that.
Yeah.
But our teachers, they prepped us because they knew, and I don't know what the financial incentives were behind the OGT, but I am of the opinion that if we didn't pass the OGT, there was financial repercussions that came on the school. I think I even
Oh, for
remember
sure.
they got
Yeah.
paid some percentage of our
Yes.
scholastic aptitude. If you got 99 percentile with your kids, you get 99% of the funding, something along those lines.
Yeah, and they did actually change that in California. They made it so you no longer have to pass a test to graduate from high school, but
Hmm.
definitely a financial incentive for the testing companies to give a lot of tests and to it's a whole industry. But aside from that,
Ah, the
yeah,
test
aside from that,
companies were
just
just leeching money out of the school systems. Hmm.
aside from that, like I'd be curious how many tests you took in because I think you're part of the kind of testing generation. Like how many tests you took. Do you remember taking a lot of tests in school?
I are you
Like
like
standardized tests, where you bubbled them in and
are you talking like a state level test or
yeah,
just
sorry, like a state test.
I
Yeah.
think there was a freshman test, if I'm remembering correctly, that I think was not as important. And
Mhm.
then there was the OGT, which was later, maybe when I was like a junior. I don't think it was when you were a senior. I think there was 2, if I'm
Okay.
remembering correctly. I 100% remember the OGT. I think there might have been some sort of a freshman test of some nature. Those are the 2, and then when I was going to college, I took the ACT. I never
Yeah.
took the SAT.
Okay.
I know
Okay.
those are college level exams.
Yeah, no, but okay, that's interesting. So then you didn't actually get into the like real intense testing environment. Probably came right after you. But basically now, like for example, my kids are 10 and 13, so they're going to 6th and 8th grade. My daughter's elementary school, from about the last month of school, they're taking tests a lot, like a lot of tests. They're in just taking tests all day, every day. That's kind of the norm now. You're
Really?
taking yeah, you're taking all of these standardized tests so that we can measure your performance and all that, which again a whole nother conversation. But most educators nowadays, they see the value of a standardized like a norm reference test that gives you like really good data and you understand where the kids are at. Like I don't think we're saying we shouldn't have those, but it's just gotten so out of hand. And like what the way you said it, like a few in your and maybe once a year you take one test for 3 hours and then you have a standard of knowing whether the kids are learning. And so again, those are not required for this education savings account. And I think parents are basically saying, look, like a lot of them are homeschooling and they weren't doing those tests anyway. So, some of the schools will do some type of test where they can, there's like computerized tests you can do that are kind of like a mirroring the standardized state test. You could do
Mhm.
those types of tests just to show that that you're doing well. Interestingly enough, most students actually do just fine and actually better than the public schools when they're not doing all of the like standardized curriculum and the all of that kind of stuff. Like you said, like your example of going into like hiking and nature, that could be a micro school. And shockingly, with some great teachers, like surprising to us, with some great teachers, you would probably do really well on a standardized test in May.
Yeah, I've actually heard about schools that are, like, nature-based,
Yeah,
and
for
that
sure.
that was one that I was remembering. I think I read a John Krakauer piece about like, delinquent kids, and that was, like, their sort of, like, reformation tactic that they would send them on these, like, 50-mile hikes through the woods, and it was bad because they were, like some kids were getting injured and stuff, but
Right, right.
that was the premise of the piece is that it was sorta
Yeah,
dangerous. But I could 100% see, like, if you had a kid who was willing to go out and do that kinda difficult thing and a teacher that was smart enough to be able to relate it to some different things, like, why
yeah,
wouldn't that be just as good as sitting in a classroom? Not to mention so much better for your body, your mind, your
exactly.
soul, your all that stuff.
which is why a lot of parents are choosing these micro schools because they're finding a theme that works for their family. Like I had a friend who opened one in South Dakota, and she's in rural South Dakota, and the kids are literally just hanging out. Not just hanging out, but they're in the nature. They're in the farm. They're on the land. They're doing stuff. They're using their hands. And she's a trained educator, so she's also teaching them all the basics and all the important things. But there's ways to do this that's so much better than the paradigm they're operating in right now.
Yeah, I wanna open a business micro school. Man, we could just be churning out stock traders, we could just be churning out
Absolutely.
entrepreneurs. You don't even need to go to college. 'Cau I mean, I
Nope.
think that you could learn almost everything you need to know about business, enough to at least start a business
Yeah.
by the age you're 18. Imagine if you had 4 years with a kid to teach them how to do online business, online
Yep.
sales, online marketing. Those kids are gonna be so much better than you and me at TikTok. By the time they're done with their micro schooling and they're 18, they probably have 1,000,000 followers on TikTok. You're like,
Absolutely.
you're gonna crush it. Whether that's your future or not, you're gonna crush it.
Which is why if you think about micro schools, it's mirroring and kind of like reflecting where we are as a society, right? Like again, YouTube creators, all kids can. So why would we have these? By the time a traditional school open in 10 years, the world's going to be different, right? So we need things to happen quickly. We need kids to be
Right.
learning. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think entrepreneur micro school, a business micro school would be super cool, and I think you'd get a lot of families. I'm sure in your community you could find 20 high school kids in probably like a week. That would be like, wait, Alex is doing a micro school. Yeah, what's he doing? Okay, great. We're going to teach you this. We're going to teach you that. And in a few years, I'd be surprised. You're basically saying, hey, do you want your kid to be an entrepreneur? Do you want to save 200 grand on college tuition when you're not even sure if they're going to get a job and it's going to take them 5 or 6 years to graduate?
So is the micro school legislation different? I just looked it up, and they do have charter schools in the state of Ohio, but would that
So yeah.
automatically grant us access to micro schools or no?
Okay, so micro schools can be run. The term micro school just means it's 10 between 10 and 150 or like 5 or 10, like really small, no more than 150. That there's like a national center now, the National Microschooling Center, and they've defined it as 10 to 150. Okay. Now those micro schools could be run as public micro schools, meaning like there are district schools now that are running a micro school of 50 kids because it's just like R&D. They're just like testing it out and they want to compete. Or it could be a private school, or it could be a charter micro school. So the funding mechanisms for all three, like all three of them, all have micro schools. Most of them are privately run, but there's a large number that I think are actually being run by like district schools or charter schools.
I'm kinda looking around, and I'm not
Yeah,
quite
yeah. What are you
sh
seeing?
well, I'm seeing summer camp registration. I'm seeing the Juniper School, but that's a middle school. Community schools, I'm not quite seeing anything that's totally calling out. Maybe just the term micro school isn't quite what I should be
Kind of a
looking
new
for.
term, I think, but and honestly, they've been around forever. It's kind of like a redux of the one room schoolhouse, right? Like we're gonna have a small group of kids in multiple grades.
That was what my great grandfather did. I saw pictures of it. They had like 13 kids in a schoolhouse in like a rural town in Ohio. And
Yeah, my mother-in-law in Nebraska, she's what, mid-70s, and she's like, "Yeah, that's how I grew up. I don't know why we ever changed it. That's the best way to do it." I'm like, "Yeah, good question."
so why do you think that these kids are getting as good of results as they might be versus your standard public school system? We could
Yeah,
probably go all the way back and talk about the history of the public education system. I've talked about it a little bit before on this podcast. I'm sure you know more about them myself. But
yeah.
why do you think the results are at least as good, if not better?
I think it's because one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that parents saw kind of what the norm of like public schooling was. In that there's been research that shows you could teach like math, reading, writing, the most important kind of foundational skills in about 2 hours. Like that's as much time as learning is going on in an elementary school, and then probably even the same amount of time in like a high school, like the actual learning, because there's so many distractions. But basically, I think parents saw that there's so much inefficiencies. Like you said, high school is kind of like socialization for you, right? And so I think people just started seeing that we could do it better. And I think the better is if you're talking about a small school with 20 kids or one teacher and ten kids and one teacher, they're just getting more attention and the teacher can respond to what they need. And I think we have this belief that learning happens from like a textbook and curriculum. But to your point about the nature school, or there's like a story of a guy who put a computer in the middle of a like a rural area in India, Sugana
Mm,
Mitra, and the kids taught themselves through YouTube and other. He had internet. I don't know how he got the internet, but he had somehow the kids taught themselves like crazy stuff, like calculus, and they did it on their own. And
mm,
so if you can just minimize the number of kids and give them the environment where they can actually just learn, we're set up to learn, right? And so if you could just create that environment, which these smaller schools do, and where you're not, like most kids are learning in spite of the kind of big public school system, not because of it.
mm. Talk to me also, because this is how I felt when I was a kid, that it almost makes you dislike learning. Like, it
Mhm.
conditions you that this is learning and this is no fun.
Yep.
It's kinda
That was
like
my
if I told you, "Hey, David, we're gonna exercise," and you go, "Alright, what are we doing today?" I was like, "We're gonna do 300 burpees." You're gonna be like,
that's a great
"This is
analogy.
this is exercising? Yeah, this is how you exercise." And you're gonna be
Yes.
like, "God, I hate exercising." But, like, if you and me just went out and, like, played pickleball, you'd be like, "Dude, this is so fun. Like, I love this. I love exercising." But
Such a great
instead, when you just
analogy.
jam it down their throat with, like, the worst possible way to do it, yeah, I hate this thing.
And this, I told you I left school. When I started teaching, I ran away from it because it reminded me of my schooling experience, my public
Mm,
schooling experience. That was just like impersonal and not great. And it just made me not want to learn. I thought learning was not fun and boring. So it wasn't until I got to community college and then ultimately a 4-year college that I was like, oh, I actually like similar to you. I just like studying and learning. I love like I study history, so I was like, let me just ask questions and talk to people. But I think that that's not. Oh, I was going to tell you. So there's one of the most watched TED talks ever. I want to say it's the top 5. Is called I can't remember the title, but it's by Sir Ken Robinson, who just recently passed. But he's a UK professor, and his book is called Creative Schools, and it argues with like tons of evidence that starting in first grade, schools are literally beating creativity out of children.
the title is "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" This has
There it
70
is.
million views. That's pretty good.
Yeah. And so this, I think it's from 15 years ago. But yeah, so we have created a system where we are actually teaching kids how not to be creative and how to not like learning.
And it is the thesis sort of we're forcing them to obey the rules, follow the path. Don't no, this is the curriculum. This is 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 curriculum. How you're going to do it. This is the right way to do it, which is
Yep.
really an antithesis of entrepreneurship.
It
Entrepreneurship is
is.
just, hey, you have to solve this problem different than someone else solved it previously.
Yep, exactly.
And
That's
if you're
exactly
never trained on that, and actually you have like an aversion to solving the problem in a different way, then it's going to be really difficult to get your brain outside of that. And I don't know how I got out of that. I think maybe I was just like stubborn and not maybe rebellious, but I just didn't ever buy into answers that I didn't think made sense. So if
yeah.
you gave me the answer and I was like, "Nah, I don't think that makes sense." I wasn't just gonna be like, "All right, well, I'm gonna do it." I would be like, no, probably not gonna do it. Or if I do it, I'm gonna do it begrudgingly."
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that is the system we built, is to basically have a bunch of followers and to be compliant and to follow the rules and to not ask too many questions and just do what you're told, right? And so that's the way the system was built. Like a small percentage are supposed to go and be the CEOs, but vast majority work in factories and offices and not actually ask questions or think for themselves.
Have you seen any of the now, emerging discussion about how boys are having a tougher time with education?
It's been going on for a while. So I read a book when I was tutoring boys. I was working with all these teenage boys before I left the bank. Like I told you, I was always working with kids. This was 2000, and gosh, I got to remember the name of the book. But this was one of the seminal books written almost 25 years ago. But there's a crisis with boys in education, and I saw this amazing school in the San Francisco Bay Area. It was a boys' middle school, and everything they were doing, they were standing up. They were always building something. They had like tons of space to ride their skateboards. Like it was just all about like moving and building and creating things. And I feel like that's not what our school system is set up to do. Like my son is 13, he'll be 14 in November. He's going into 8th grade. And it's been really sad to watch him go to middle school because he has to sit still
Mm.
for the whole entire day. He switches teachers every 52 minutes. He can't talk to his friends because they got to rush one class to the next. And so we're talking about a kid that needs to move and break things and, just express himself. And it's not happening. And so, interestingly enough, like colleges have much more women, they start out like more women than men. I think it's like 60 to 40 now because the school system is setting up girls because girls are trained to be more compliant. And
Mhm.
so that's a whole nother crisis. But with the boys, it's a whole issue.
Yeah, the way that I've heard it is that by 2030, 2 out of every 3 people in a college university will be female.
There you go.
Which is creating a whole 'nother set of, like, dynamics down the road where there's gonna be a lot of women who are out earning men, and then you get into dating dynamics, and then you get into, like, falling rates of, birth and
Yeah.
marriage, which is, like, a whole 'nother thing. So, yeah, it all sort of starts from this educational level,
Yeah.
and I've heard it that the prefrontal cortex of, I think, a 17-year-old girl is comparable to a 25-year-old man.
Yes.
So the boy just, like, can't control their
Yep.
impulses in a high school classroom. That's why they're in the back, like, making fart
Yep.
noises,
Exactly.
and the girls are like, "This is ridiculous," but
Like, yeah.
it's literally 2 like, they're the same physical age, but
Yeah.
they mentally are not on the same
Totally
wavelength.
different. Yeah.
And the other thing that I heard in and you can probably speak to this, is that there are more as a percentage female fighter pilots in the Air Force than there are male kindergarten teachers in the United States as a
Oh, yeah.
percentage.
I believe that. There's very few male kindergarten teachers. Yeah. I
And I've
totally.
heard that it's very difficult for young boys to connect with a female teacher. And then also, I've heard that female teachers tend to judge boys' actions more harshly than a male teacher would. Whereas a male would just be like, David's just kind of being a boy. The
Yeah.
female teachers are like, no, David, you cannot hit. You have to go to the principals. So boys get suspended more. They get in trouble more often when
Yep.
they have a female teacher versus a male
Totally
teacher.
true, and it's even worse when you're talking about boys of color. So, like, black boys are suspended at a huge rate
Mm,
compared to, their white counterparts, and a lot of that is just, like, the teacher's not understanding the kids. So, similarly, like, a female teacher not understanding what boys really need, and yeah, and it's just, and again, if you're thinking about the way the system is set up, it's set up to where the kids are supposed to get sit what I call sit and get instruction. Like, you're supposed to sit still, teacher talks at you, and and you think maybe in an elementary school they'd be a little more like movement based, but for the most part, doing a lot of sitting and a lot of listening, and that is not setting up the boys for success. So then the teacher's in a kind of defensive space, and the boys are poking and farting and doing all the things they do, and the girls are more comfortable just sitting, with their hands folded in their laps, and then it just gets worse as they get older because then the boys hit puberty, and like you said, the difference between the prefrontal cortex and the maturity levels. I think my friend who's a middle school expert said something like it's 3 years, like a 13-year-old boy is 3 years behind a 13-year-old girl, similar to what you were talking about. So by the time they're in high school, it's the gap just keeps widening, and there's yeah, so the system does not set up to support boys at all, which is why there has been a resurgence for single sex schools like boys or girls.
yeah, I was gonna ask, what is your thoughts on a solution to that? Do you hold boys back a little bit? That's been one thing that's been suggested, like, girls start at 5, boys start at 8.
Yeah, I don't think that's the solution. I think the solution is what Ken Robinson talks about in creative schools, which is create schools that actually engender creativity and collaboration and project-based learning. All of my schools have project-based learning, meaning the kids are not sitting still; they're moving. We also have the lowest time of recess in any country, of any developed country. We have the least amount of recess. It's like 15 or
Interesting.
20 minutes a day, which is really hard on boys. But yeah, but you create an environment in the classroom where the kids are constantly moving and interacting, and so that the boys aren't getting in trouble all the time, and you're meeting them where they're at. I think that's the number one solution, is just create schools where the kids are actually are doing stuff and they're in charge of their own learning, and we're just kind of flipping the paradigm of this outdated model where you're just supposed to sit still and listen and learn things you're not even interested in.
You said that a charter school has to be open to everyone.
Mhm.
Should I start a boy-only charter school? Or probably not?
Let me think about that. Yeah, I guess you can't. That's so funny. I've never thought about that. So maybe the ones I've seen have been private schools. Yeah, I don't think you can do a boy only charter school because it would not be open to everyone. Yeah.
What about a boy-only, micro school?
Yes, yes, because in your because like I said, I think like 2/3 or more of micro schools are actually privately funded. There's a small, like I said, there's a small amount that are district schools and there's a small amount that are charters, but the majority of them are private schools, which meaning you're not having to follow all of the like open access and all that.
I gotcha. So probably the easiest thing to do for a micro school is just open, say we're accepting 20 kids. Every kid is 20 grand this year. You find 20 wealthy parents and then boom, you've got your school and you're kind of on your way. Then maybe in the future you can work on getting the public funding, but you're off and running. And because it's just a private transaction, you're allowed to do more of what
Yeah,
you do.
exactly, and you're thinking like I did, and I live in California, but I'm opening my next set of schools will be in Phoenix because of the fact that it's an hour, it's like 2 hour flight, and that way I can have the school open to as many people as possible, and I don't have to say like, oh, it's 20,000 now, just eliminated. Because I've always worked with all different types of kids and different income levels, so I didn't want to start a school where tons of the kids cannot afford 20,000, especially nowadays, man.
Yeah.
They cannot afford $20,000 a year for their kids. So in Arizona, you're going 8 to 10,000. So if the tuition's about 8 or 10,000, which is what I run my charter schools on, then you're basically saying it's like a charter school. You're getting a free education for your child, and it's going to be a great school. But yeah,
And
that's the basic idea. Like open up a school and get the tuition, either whether it's people are paying for it or you're getting the state funding, and then take it from there.
interesting. What is the premise of those micro schools that you are opening? Is there a specific teaching modality? Is there a specific topic that you're going to be focusing on heavily?
Yeah, so I'm focusing on the project-based learning aspect, which is experiential, hands-on learning, creating projects. When they're younger, and then when they get older, then they're doing internships and getting real-world, actual applicable skills. In going and working for companies and doing things that they can actually get jobs for if they don't want to go to college or they're going to college. But yeah, it's basically focused on project-based learning. And then another kind of buzzword in the education world is self-directed learning, meaning that the kids are actually in charge. Like they're deciding what they're going to learn and you're helping them figure that out. So you're like, okay, today we're going to learn about history. You're giving them some guardrails and you're like, okay, here's some different things you can look into. And then the kids just go for it and they start researching and doing things. And then they go down a certain path and you're more of a guide than a teacher. So you're facilitating the learning rather than giving them the information.
And with that history lesson, that would that be a day, or would you say, Alex, we have a week, and then at the end of the week, I'm gonna have you put a presentation together
Yeah.
about what you learned about your specific historical topic, which for you is the fall of Yugoslavia.
Yeah, it's good question. It's typically 1 to like 8 weeks, depending on the depth you want the kids to go. Like if you want to go super deep, it could be like an 8 week project or an 8 week exploration. But if it's maybe just a shorter one, it could be like a week.
Interesting. What is this project-based learning? I heard you talk about that. Is that
It's
sort
the
of
same idea. It's the same idea. Like you pose, or it's become very popular, but I think people don't really know how to do it very well. But the idea is that they're creating projects. So you pose big questions, and you get the kid, or you have the kids pose big questions, like why are we having environmental problems, or why are there homeless people, or whatever. And then
mm,
you guide them. You would actually do really well in this environment with the way you're so curious and the way you just like. I love the way your brain works, and you would just be like, I would love to be your teacher, by the way. You would just be asking like 5,000 questions. And I'd be like, yes, Alex, this is it. Yes. Instead of me like trying to tell you stuff, you would just be like, okay, wait, what about this? And what about that? And I'd be like, go check that. Go check it. Okay, come back when you got that. Okay, let's do this. And then I would say, okay, now you got 5 choices. Are you doing a PowerPoint? Are you going to go pitch the city council? Are you going to, get your parents to give you money to then, do a campaign? Like, then you have some sort of authentic assessment. So I could see like, what did you learn? And what do you know? And it's not taking a test. It's actually showing what you know. Like,
mm.
and then you're getting ready, then you're practicing life skills like presentation and influence and leadership skills and stuff like that.
I would have loved that as a kid.
I know.
Now now, do you find that some kids, I don't wanna say don't do as well with that, but when I was in both undergrad and my college, I guess high school and college, I would find that a teacher would ask a question and everyone would just kinda sit there quiet, and then he'd be like, "Come on, anybody?" And I'd be like, I'd
Good
put my
old
hand
school.
up and I'd be like, "Okay, like, here's I
Right.
think what you're getting at."
Yeah.
Maybe that was just because I was, like, more confident in public speaking than other people, but do you find that some kids have, like, a tough time, like, putting themselves into it, or is that sort of alleviated by that small classroom environment?
It's
I guess,
alleviated. Yeah. It's
are
the
there
what you're referring to as the conditioning. The kids have been conditioned to be passive, right?
mm,
And it's the same in higher education. You sit there and some expert just talks to you, and then every once in a while they call it good teaching because they asked you to raise your hand and ask a question. Well, that's not good teaching. So basically, if you create an environment where the kids are actively engaged and they're asking questions, they're working in groups, they're working together, they're doing research, they're always engaged, then you don't have it's you've turned the paradigm upside down. You're no longer a passive recipient of learning, you're an active agent. And once you do that, yeah, some kids are going to be naturally like, have more proclivity to like jump in and take initiative, but that's not human nature. Human nature is not to sit there and just wait around. It's because by the time they get to college, they've already sat in those classes so many times and they know there's going to be an Alex that's going to bail them out. And the teacher knows that they're going to be waiting for Alex to bail them out. And it's just the system that we all have gotten used to.
mm. So I would say the first thing that has to happen kind of is you sort of retrain these kids like, "Hey, this is different. It's not gonna be like every other class that you've been to. It's
Yep.
gonna
That's what I would
operate a lot differently."
I would say that every day for the first 3 months. We would do a lot of Socratic seminars, which is, the Socratic method, which has a bad name because of law school, but it's basically just asking great questions. Like Socrates would never tell you the answer. He'd always ask you questions. So we would sit in a
Mm,
circle. I would tell them in ninth grade, I'd have them in ninth grade. Then they'd come, this is when I was a teacher. Then they'd come back in 12th grade. We'd start with ninth grade history. We'd finish with 12th grade government. And by the time they came in back in 12th grade, they already knew my system. It was like, get in a circle. I'm going to put 5 questions on the board, and then you guys are going to generate your own questions and you're in charge. I'm not in charge here. I'm just here to observe. But I had to teach them that. It took like most of ninth grade to teach them that, because you're changing their mindset, the way they think.
mm, interesting. So it sounds to me like one of the best things that could happen in the next couple of years for the education system is mostly regulation, if I'm hearing what you're saying, that more states could kind of, loosen what constitutes a school and
Yes.
also allow some public money to go to these micro schools, and I think we're gonna get a lot better results. I'm very libertarian in the fact that I want people to just vote with their dollars, vote with their boots.
Yeah.
So, if the local school in your town is not getting votes by no kids want to go there, well,
Yeah.
that's kind of the market deciding that, "Hey, that
Yeah.
school was not doing a good job."
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. For the most part, I agree.
So, in the state of Ohio, if there weren't micro schools or there just weren't that many charter schools, it sounds like unleashing that would be one of the first things that could happen. And it sounds like Arizona is maybe on the forefront, but some other states are a little bit behind. Maybe my state's a
So
little bit behind.
it's so interesting. You just said it's so funny because I usually say this and I didn't think about it. I usually say the three best states are Arizona, Florida, and Ohio in that order. So
Oh,
actually, your state is doing some interest. I haven't looked into it yet because it's so far from me, and I'm not going to take a plane there. But but what I am doing, which is interesting, is so you're absolutely right. There is as the policymakers are catching on, they're seeing where the parent demand is going, and there's a tipping point now. It used to be so kind of political, but now it's more of like a center, is more of like a central center moderate issue. Before it used to be more right wing. So now that it's become more of like a moderate issue, the legislatures are actually passing these bills. And to your point, like we need to like get clear on the regulations and what that looks like, and make sure that it's kids are safe and that they're not we're just not whatever. And the market will solve work that all out. And what I'm doing to kind of see this 30 years in the future is I'm creating a model where all these things I talked about, like self-directed learning, project-based learning, the my whole mind, body, soul curriculum, like that's actually in a box that you can buy in your community. So it's like a business in a box. And now we're empowering
oh,
teachers and parents to run their own small business so that they're not just the other thing public schools do is they sideline the parents. They don't want you involved. They want you coming in and like in elementary school reading the kids, but they don't really want you involved. They don't want to deal with you, right? Because it's a system that they don't want you to, they say they want your opinions, but they don't. So we're talking about empowering parents, empowering local communities. I'm creating the business in the box. You take that business and we take a percentage. It's like a licensing agreement, but you can just take your business, you can just take this and run this in your community. You could just take one and do this in Ohio. Like it would take you 3 months. And you would sign up with me. We'd give you the box and we'd support you. We'd coach you. You'd be part of a national membership. And we're getting these across the country. And there's one called Apogee Schools where they just are starting in the fall, and they
Mm,
have 50 schools that are already coming on as their first cohort.
Apogee School. That's I mean, that sounds like a fantastic business and idea.
Yeah.
I love the idea of capitalism because people tell me, well, capitalism's screwing everything up and it's, all these people are getting rich. And then I just point to situations like that. I'm like, well, what if David sets up a school in your area that can be run by a local teacher who's going to make more money now and they're going to deliver a higher level of service to your kid. David makes a couple bucks, the teacher makes a couple of bucks, and there's no money out of the pocket of the family who sent this kid there. Like, explain that one to me. Who's getting ripped off there? Who's
Yeah. That,
being
yeah.
forced against their will to do this transaction? So,
And there's a
yeah.
few companies that are actually starting to do this. This is where I have kind of built the idea. There's one called Acton Academy, just so people can check it out. They're now in 300. They have 300 schools across the country. They started as one 5 years ago. There's another one called Primer, which has gotten a lot of seed funding, and they're in Florida and Arizona. And so and there's now 33 states, like I said, that have these new funding laws, and 11 in the last year have passed new laws. So it's starting to really pick up quickly.
It's kind of like medical marijuana going recreational. You can see it coming. You're just like,
Yep.
it's coming to my state. I just don't know when.
Exactly. It's a matter of when.
So
Yep.
you're getting prepared as more and more states allow this, and hopefully, if that's in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, you have more and more schools that are already open, more proof of concept that you'll
Yep.
be able to say, "Hey, this has worked in 50 different cities for 50 different business owners and for
Yep.
20,000 kids. If it's something you're interested in, let's
You're,
bring
you're,
it down."
you literally just mimicked my pitch deck. Yeah, I'm out right now talking to investors, and it's like I got in 5 years I'll be serving 20,000 kids, and we're opening one in Arizona, and then it's going to go 3 to 5 to 20 to 50, and so it's get the proof of concept down, because I've been doing it for so long. I already understand the business of running schools and what makes a great school and the curriculum and all of that, and now it's just a matter of how do we. And I've really felt like we need to empower the people on the ground, like people in the community. So if they're
Mhm.
not happy with their kids' education, it used to be like, well, I guess I'll homeschool. And then like somebody has to stay home all day and then they don't have any social life. It's like, this is like a great solution for that. Like it's empowering communities to take over their kids. And honestly, one of the fastest growing communities are African American, Latino. It's the people that are, have a lot of issues in the schools, that their kids are not treated fairly. And so it's all different types of
Mm.
communities that are taking back their kids' lives and trying to get them prepared for the future. Because again, what's the other thing we talked about? Is the kid going to be prepared for the future if they're doing this rote learning and passive? The world has changed so quickly and it's changing so fast with AI and everything else I'm sure you talk about and know about. We got to change. It's just crazy how outdated the education system is.
Do you have any fears that there could be kids that are left behind if this system works as well as you think it will? And then there's still all these kids in public schools, or maybe it starts to shift and then there's state by state issues where some states have them and others don't have them. Because I could foresee a situation where Harvard and Yale and Stanford and all these schools, they're selecting from a small group now of these schools as opposed to public schools, which I think they already sort of do with private schools.
They already do. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question and a valid concern, because the promise of the public school system is that we're going to serve everybody. It's like, what it's like all about our American democracy is that we're going to have a public system. It's like Thomas Jefferson, we want to have kids actually, anybody, regardless of background, race, money. Anyway, so I think that's a concern. I like the way I'm hearing some of my peers talk about it. It's the way I would like to talk about it, is that we don't have to have one or the other, right? We could have a portfolio of schools. We could have the traditional public schools. We could have micro schools. We could have charter schools, and basically what works best for your child, and make sure that we're creating a system where there's a lot of options for everybody. So it's not, because I think that the fear is like, oh my gosh, we're going to shut down the public schools. Or I heard somebody the other day say it's going to be like for the poor and the disabled. And I'm like, what? Like that's getting a little bit extreme here, because I feel like if public funding is supporting this, then you're able to offer this to as many people as possible. And then it's going to push the public schools to actually change and to get better at what they're doing.
Mm.
Like I said, they're opening micro schools. Maybe they'll have to be more decentralized, or they'll have to start changing.
Well, that's a good point that you'll force the public schools to get better. I guess the fear would be that they've already built this huge school and now they have all these overhead costs. And now you start terminating teachers. The teachers hopefully could go to the other schools, but this building is just so big that we don't have the student body now to sustain it. And it's such a high cost of overhead. Maybe that, but
Okay,
that's happening all over the world.
that's
Malls are
happened over, but
yeah,
let me
malls
tell
are
you.
getting repurposed into co-working spaces.
Exactly, yeah.
Things are
But I
gonna
was
have
gonna
to change.
they're gonna have to change. But I was gonna tell you a really interesting example from the charter schools that I ran. So we actually had the district that we were in change their whole entire model, and they broke their school into 5 smaller learning academies.
Hmm.
So that was as a direct result of us being in the community, because we had 500 kids trying to get into our school, which meant they could see that they were losing a lot of money. And so they started to change their philosophy. They started doing like these smaller advisory groups of 17 kids, and they changed so many things, and it was a direct reflection of what we had success doing. So I think it's a good example of they'll have to figure it out. Like if they have a lot of land, they'll have to break it down into smaller schools, or they'll have to start creative solutions where they're renting, or sharing space or whatever it may be. But like you said, the market will correct. I think it's a valid concern that we're giving up on public schools, but I think we can do it where it's a portfolio and there's a bunch of different options for a lot of different kids.
This may not be high on your list of concerns, but what about athletics?
Okay. I think it's really interesting that you bring that up, because I'm a basketball coach and my kids are like really into competitive basketball. And when I was teaching at the charter schools, 20 years ago, I was really disappointed that I didn't get to be part of that big school athletic program, because that's the best part of like the big public high school, right? Is like the extracurriculars. But
Playing soccer in high school was probably the most fun experience of my life.
So I agree. And it was the same for me in high school. But apparently, and you can tell me if you've heard this from people that are younger in your community, it's not even about playing for the school team anymore.
Depends what sport, I think.
Okay. Because I talked to my kid's basketball trainer, and she said, I got to tell my kids, like, they got to at least try in the school games. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, well, they don't take it very seriously because they're all doing AAU, and, they get their all-star teams together. And it's like, they're just mess around at the school team. And I'm like, wait, are they in high school? And she was just sharing with me that high school is not the place anymore, unless it's like a private high school that recruits. Because if you think about it anyway, so that's what I've heard. And maybe it's different for soccer or football or whatever. But I do think athletics is it's a good point. One of the ideas I had is that you actually are sharing, like, say you have a hub of micro schools, you got like 50 in a community or 20 or whatever, that you could actually treat that as one private school, which some charter schools have done. And then you have a shared facility like a gym where everybody's paying a percentage to share the gym, and you create a school team that way. That's like one solution I've been playing around with, but I think it's a concern.
Yeah, I think that's a decent solution. I played soccer in high school with a kid on my club team who was
Yeah.
homeschooled, but he played for the high school team. Now, I don't know how the logistics of that work. He was pretty good, actually.
I think that's another option. I think if you're located, I think it's per district has different policies, but if you're located in the school district and you're homeschooled, which would be similar to like a micro school, then you can play for the high school team. So that's another option too.
I think that to your point, the basketball example, it
Yeah.
depends on the sport because
Okay.
basketball has like a club aspect to it,
True.
whereas football, there's no club. It's
That's
just
true.
like just school. Same thing is true like with college, like just college. I would imagine that would probably also be true with something like track or
Mhm. Right.
wrestling or
Where there's not like
um,
a better option that
yeah,
dilutes the school team. Yeah.
like baseball, maybe you play club baseball. I think maybe there's a lot more club softball than there is baseball, but I know there's club soccer. I always played club soccer and high school soccer. And
Yeah.
now the kids who are really good, they'll go play for their academy that's like the MLS academy. So like for us, it'd be the Columbus Crew Academy. For you, it might be like LA Galaxy Academy
Yeah.
or you got San Diego coming in, so maybe you'll play for the San Diego Academy, and
Yeah.
that would be age 16 and 18, and that would be played generally at the same time as the high school season, so they overlap, and that
Yeah.
created a difficult, decision for some kids that were really good because you knew the academy's a better level,
Yeah,
and it's probably more likely that I can go on and play at least collegiately, if
right.
not professionally, if I
Yeah,
continue to play for this. But because I did that, I have to not play high school.
yeah.
So I think that sports where there's a club aspect, maybe it's not as big of a deal, the high school, but like football, there's no club football. Like
Yeah, that's true.
50 people, like there's no clubs for that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I
So
think you're absolutely right about that, because now that I'm thinking about it, when I taught high school and had my charter schools, they were the kids that had a club element and really didn't care that we didn't have a school team. And we weren't big enough to have a football team, but the kids that wanted to have that sports environment, I think, is important. And I also think that the schools that I'm designing have like a whole physical fitness element. It's like reimagining PE.
yeah.
um,
Oh, absolutely. I think that's super important.
which is more, not more important, but just as important as sports, right? What's important about sports is like getting the exercise, teamwork, leadership, all that kind of stuff. So you could create that without the actual school team. But as somebody who used to coach basketball in high school, like I really do miss that part of it. But if the kids are actually more prepared for the world in the future and they can have to play club sports, like I think that's an okay trade off.
Well, I guess the only thing of that might be that club sports are generally pay to play,
That's
right?
true.
So if you have, again, if we're thinking about the low income kid who's now in a better situation, he doesn't have to go to the low income school. He can go to the charter school or he can go to the micro school, and
Yeah,
the government subsidy is paying for your portion of it. He may not have the money to go shell out 2
that's true.
grand to play the AAU season and travel all up and down California. So he
That's
might
true.
just be like, "I'm SOL. Now I don't get to play basketball," which would be, a really enjoyable thing for that person.
It's a problem, and I think that's like, more of just the kind of haves and have-nots problem. But to that point, in my community here in Sacramento, they actually in Sacramento, California, we actually have like Parks and Rec and local kind of like government, local county, city organizations that run basketball leagues that my kids play in, and it's actually kind of cool for them because it's all different types of kids, so they get to see, not
Mm.
just the kids in our neighborhood. But I think that's a good point. I actually think that's a larger concern about where athletics are going, because we're just leaving so many kids behind if you don't have the reason. I mean, the amount of money we pay for AAU is crazy. It's insane.
Well, to just take a small tangent, just
Yeah.
from my, field of soccer, the European model of soccer is very different, where it is more of that academy. So let's
Oh,
say
I
you're
heard
like
about Yeah.
let's say you're a really good 8-year-old,
Yeah.
which how can you be that good at 8? Well, I don't know. They find these kids. Then you live in some rural part of England. Manchester will bring you in and they will pay for your schooling.
Yeah.
So
Right.
Manchester United has a school and they will put you through school half the day and then you'll train half the day. You're essentially a professional soccer player at
Yeah.
this point.
Yeah.
And in order for you to make the U10 team, you have to perform. You have to
Mhm.
continue to be one of the best 20 or so 8-year-olds. So then these kids, be it a good thing or a bad thing, they're all competing with each other to be the best 10-year-old that they could possibly be.
Yeah.
And if you make it, you move on to the U10. If you don't make it, you get bumped out and they send you home and you go back to school and hey, you had your chance, but it didn't work out for you. And instead of the kid having to pay to be on the team, he is essentially getting paid.
Yeah.
And if he becomes one of the best players at the U18 level, then he might move up and get a professional contract. And to take it one step further, they actually are incentivized by the rest of Europe to build players because they own the rights to that player now. So, hey, we invested all this money to get little David up to speed, but now he wants to leave and he wants to go play for he wants to play for a German team. He wants to play for
Yeah.
Borussia Dortmund. Well, we own his rights because we built him. I'm doing air quotes.
Yeah.
So I get to sell him to that team, and maybe I get a $2 million transfer fee. So we not
Right.
only made our money, but then we made it, 50 times over. So there's Europeans who specifically and explicitly say the United States will never compete in soccer until they go away from the pay for play model.
My friend was just telling me this exact story because we were visiting them this weekend, and his daughter is like a really good soccer player. And yeah, that's a fascinating. I mean, it seems to me like the trade-off there is that these clubs own the kids, though. It's like that's crazy.
Yeah, but they're also these kids, they feel fortunate because they have an opportunity that they may not have
Yeah,
gotten
yeah,
otherwise.
yeah. That's true.
And there's a lot of stories about players that came up. I came to Tottenham when I was 8 years old. Harry Kane, one of the best players in the world, came to my team, Tottenham, when he was like 8 or 10, went all the way up through the senior team, and then he became the club's leading goal scorer, and they say he's one of our own because he, like, grew up with the team.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that happened with Messi at Barcelona. Like,
Oh, really?
Messi, they found him there. You can watch videos of this. At, like, age 6, he's on, like, these dirt fields, and he is just, like, so much better than all the 6-year-olds. It's unbelievable. You're like,
You're like,
this kid was touched by God. He was touched by the
right.
footballing gods. But then he went and, went to the Barcelona academy and debuted for the senior team when he was 16. So it
Yeah.
does work out for some players.
Yeah. That's cool.
Talk to me about the impact of COVID, because you just said that the ideas around schooling are shifting.
Yeah.
I'm putting words in your mouth that that was from COVID, but that's kind of my assumption. Tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a correct assumption, and I feel like the issue has been like bubbling up as time has gone on, and as the worlds have been changing and schools have been kind of staying the same. I think it's gotten more and more problematic, and I think COVID was like really shining a light on the issues with the public education system. And I keep saying public; it's the same with traditional private schools. And they're the same. It's the same thing. It's maybe they're a little smaller. You're paying 30,000. You're getting the same outdated education system. So yeah, with the pandemic, basically families, like I said, they started to see the problems, and I think the kids started to see it. I think we really started to see that school is about like the social aspect, which is really important. But I just feel like people just started really asking like what is school for? What are we doing? What's the purpose? What are we learning in school? Are there different ways to do? I think people had been asking for a long time, are there different ways to do school? I think
Mm,
there's like a resurgence of online learning as a result of kids getting used to being on computers. It's just so I think a lot of things changed with the pandemic, but more than anything, public opinion really shifted. I think that was the biggest thing that came out of COVID was public opinion shifted. And the other really sad thing was just the amount of issues that kids are having now in terms of like mental health,
mm.
depression, and like social, not able to socialize, just having trouble getting out of the house, and just all these kind of issues that we dealt with in general in the society, with COVID. It was even more exacerbated with kids, especially adolescents, right? Because they need that social environment and the cell phones and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Do you think the shift in the parental ideas around school was because kids were at home, parents were at home, parents were overhearing the lectures and the Zoom calls and all of that, and they went, "Wait a minute, what are you learning?" And
Yeah.
they just kind of thought that it was maybe just not up to snuff.
Yeah, I think we just got like a huge window, including myself, like with my kids seeing, like, we just got a real window into what happens in the classroom, and just kind of asking like, oh, I always tell the example of how my second grade daughter's teacher, she never did like a Zoom breakout room. It was like, I'm going to talk to you for 2 hours straight every
Mm,
day. I mean, I'm probably exaggerating a little bit. She might have had them like do a video where I think they did Go Noodle where they dance for 5 minutes, but essentially it was like, I'm going to talk to you and you're going to be in your Zoom room. And there's all these little squirrely kids. And I don't think she had any capacity or understanding of how to manage a Zoom room. And then the way she taught in the physical space was the kids sit down, they sit in front of me, they're in rows, I talk at them. And so she just didn't know. And she's considered one of the best teachers in the school. And I honestly don't really blame her because it's the system that's taught her to be that way. But she just didn't know how to do anything to engage the kids. And so I think parents are just kind of like, wait, this is what they do all day? Like, kids sit there and she's just constantly trying to babysit them. Like, that's what they do. And they just start asking a lot of questions. And then it's just common sense. Like, when I opened my school 10 years ago, people are like, oh, parents are not going to want what you're selling. Like, they're not going to be buying what you're selling. So I was talking about innovation, entrepreneurialism, getting kids to direct their own learning. And they're like, parents aren't going to be interested in that. Oh, no, no. Parents were very interested in what I was selling. They're like, they intuitively knew that this is where we need to go as a country in terms of our education system. They just
mhm.
didn't have the words or understand, when I put the vision out for them, like, yes, we want that. So they get it. I think people have just kind of felt it. And then COVID just showed us like we had some serious problems
What's going on with young people?
in general.
Yeah, you mentioned the anxious nature
Oh,
that
yeah.
they have right now, the
Yeah.
problems they have learning, obsession with smartphones, things like that. Are those things really weighing down this generation? Because it sounds like you spend a decent amount of time with them.
I actually don't spend as much time with them as I used to because now I'm kind of more removed from the schools. But I talk to people that spend a lot of time with them, and that's what I'm hearing is like just the kind of face down in the phones and trouble with eye contact and not able to really like interact very well and just feeling anxious about going out of the house and
Mm,
interacting with people at a party or having to be with people in a room. It's like they're just because they were during the pandemic, they were just in these kind of isolated spaces, and then they were using technology more. I think it's created a real mental health crisis for adolescents, and there's
mhm,
and teachers and educators are trying to figure it out, and at the same and parents, and at the same time, the teachers did not do very well. Right? They were having the similar problems. It was not fun to be a teacher and try and figure out how to do your curriculum online, and the districts took like way too long, like several months to help the teachers get Zoom set up, and it was just so the teachers are also just like really not doing well, and there's a lot of people leaving the profession, and there's a lot of angst even in the teaching profession right now. So it's kind of like a collective, it's been a very collective hard time, and I think that's why when I talk about micro schools people get really excited because there's hope, and there's there's like like somebody has a solution for them, like, oh wait, there's a way we can get out of this and still work with kids every day.
mm. Yeah, it sounds like something has to change based on what you're saying, because the students don't like it, the teachers don't like it, the parents don't like it.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I don't want to be like all doom and gloom. There's amazing teachers in the school system that are doing amazing things. They're just doing it in spite of the system, right? Like when I was in the traditional school system, I was doing everything I could in spite of the system. But there's amazing teachers that are so resilient and they're figuring out ways to make it great for the kids. I'm just speaking more generally.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, well, not to transition, but, I know you talk a lot about leadership also. You talked just momentarily about physical fitness. While we're on that subject, what is the physical fitness part of these schools that you're attempting to utilize and do?
Yeah, we haven't got too deep into that yet. It's just more about really thinking about the holistic, like mind body connection and thinking about, mindfulness and meditation and just different. So I'll tell you the vision because we haven't actually like planned all the curriculum out yet. But the idea is that we're looking at it holistically, right? So it's not just go and run a mile. It's like think about how your body works, what's your diet supposed to look like, how are
Mm,
you listening to yourself, like when do you have time for yourself, how do you take care of yourself, like all of that kind of stuff that you never get in the school system. And I think people just like manage their life, especially kids. So that's the vision for our one of my friends, the one who's doing apogee. He is working with the CrossFit folks, and they're putting together a whole curriculum for young people using CrossFit. And so that's kind of similar vision that I have, is like how do we really upgrade and kind of modernize the way we talk about physical fitness and health, and really make it fun for the kids and educate them so they know how to eat, and they understand the connection between not sleeping and eating too much sugar and not exercising and all that kind of stuff.
I told you I have a staff of people, but a lot of them are warehouse workers.
Yeah.
So those folks you just end up meeting and experiencing, and you can tell like, hey, your life experience has been way different than mine, and you
Yeah.
look at the world in a different way. But
Yeah.
I'm shocked sometimes when I see like what they're eating. Like they'll look
Mhm.
at, like, Dairy Queen mocha frappuccino. It's
Right.
gonna be like 60 grams of sugar, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"It's 9 AM, and you
Yeah.
are, like, mainlining sugar," and they're just like, "Oh, yeah, whatever," like, and then 2 hours later, it's like a Mountain Dew, and then
Yeah.
it's like a prepared meal, like, that you just zap in the microwave, and I'm like, "I don't understand how you just don't feel so terrible all the time," and maybe they just don't even realize that they don't feel bad, but I've just kind of become really in tune with my body and health and
Yeah.
fitness wellness. I don't have it all
Yeah.
figured out, but I feel like I
Yeah.
understand some rudimentary things, but clearly they were never taught that well in school.
Exactly. They were
Like,
never taught
"Hey,
that.
sugar's gonna make you feel bad." Like,
Yeah.
soda pop is gonna make you feel bad. If you eat more calories than you burn, you're gonna gain weight. When you gain weight, you might become, type 2 diabetic. That's one of the worst things that can happen to you. You're going to have uh, higher levels of inflammation. You're probably going to need to get your knees done when you turn 50.
Yep,
You're probably going to need to get your hips done. You got to be able to move your shoulders through a full range of motion, or else you're eventually going to have rounded shoulders, and then you're going to get the neck bump in the
exactly.
back. No one, I think, ever taught us any of that stuff. My PE class, it was like 50% dodgeball and then 50% like health, which
Yeah.
was like like basic anatomy and
Mhm.
things like that, like learning like names of organs and where they are. And I don't forget, I've forgotten all of them. The only things I remember is that like there was like pictures of like penises and vaginas in
Of course, we remember
the
that.
textbook, like, and that was it. And like maybe I learned how to do CPR, but I don't remember that. I know you do the BG, staying alive.
Right, right.
But no one ever taught us like,
No,
hey, if you don't move your joints through their full range of motion, they're gonna get stiff and then they're gonna get injured or you're going to become decrepit. It just depends on how fast that happens for you. It's not if, it's a when.
yeah, and that's it. You're naming the problem exactly there, which is why we're building this curriculum. And when I taught in high school in the urban schools, this is no joke what they would eat for lunch. It'd be hot Cheetos and cream cheese. And they would eat that every single day. And I feel like when you're 16, you can get away with that, but
You're right.
it's going to catch up with you.
Now I got a 25-year-old. He's like starting to exercise with us, and I'm like, that's great. But he goes to me and he goes, I just I just don't think I'm ever gonna be able to eat healthy. And I'm like,
Mhm.
what are you saying? He's like, I just like bad food too much. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
what's like a normal day of eating? And he's like, I go get like chicken fingers from like Raising Canes. And I'm like, look, I love Raising Canes. They make great food. But that's like a once every 3 months, brother. You can't do that like 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning before you come into work. Like that is it's a
Yeah.
fried treat, is what that is. That is not a meal. But he just like is like, what? And he's got these like health issues. Like he's overweight and he has like these gastrointestinal issues. And I'm like, dude, like
Yeah. It's
this
not
is
even in
what's
the paradigm.
causing, yeah, this is what
No
caused
one's ever talked to them. Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think it's really getting them to understand that. And then I also think there's just this is where capitalism, talk about like not a good part of capitalism is that the companies understand exactly what they're doing, right? Like we're gonna have the chips and the things that get people addicted early on. And if they're not aware of it, then I mean, it's incredibly hard for you and me, probably if we tried to stop eating certain, like our bodies would respond, right? Because we've just been kind of like brainwashed and physically addicted to these substances for years.
Yeah, I just listened to this podcast. It was about semaglutide and those types of GLP-1 drugs. And the individual, he was a researcher who was kind of just looking into all aspects of it. And it just so happens that he was very overweight. And he was like kind of also going through his own personal journey, like, should I take this? Should I not? But he cited this study where this individual gave rats two groups, like one like healthy kind of pellets, and then one like Cheetos and Twinkies and like all of these hyper palatable
Mhm.
foods. And then he ended up pulling the hyper palatable foods away from the other group. And he wanted to see if when I go give them healthy foods, are they going to eat more? Because that was kind of his thesis, like that these hyper palatable foods are going to force them to like eat more, that they're like hunger hormones are going to be more ramped up. And he said, actually, what he found is that they just refused to eat the healthy foods until they almost starved to death.
Yep, I believe it.
That was the only they, like, tried it, and they're like, "No." And they know now that these foods will actually, like, rewire your brain to say,
Yep.
like, "I don't
Yeah.
like these other foods. These other foods
Yep.
taste
Absolutely.
gross. I need these foods instead." It's a wild thing, man.
So on that note, when I was running a school, we had this company called Revolution Foods, which I think is still around, and they had this great disruptive model for the like nutrition, like food lunch program, where they got the reimbursements from the federal government, and they were able to bring in like organic, healthy food to kids and like low income kids in our community. Kids wouldn't eat it. You
Mm.
could get them to eat it. Like they would do like brown rice, and they tried really hard to do like brown rice, enchiladas, and tacos, and hamburgers, and all these things that were like kind of like what the kids ate. But I would go and like walk through the cafeteria afterwards, and there'd just be just left food left everywhere. So it's
Ugh.
exactly that study that you were talking about. By the time they were 15, 16, they couldn't even eat it unless it had some sort of like processed. saturated fats or whatever. It couldn't be organic and healthy. So it's I don't even know what the solution to that one
Yeah,
is, but at a
that's a
minimum, it's at least educating them. One solution is educating them and getting them to understand, like, at least understand how your nutrition and your diet and your mindset and your thoughts and your physical activities all connected to how you feel and your success in life.
talk to me about leadership. What have you learned about leadership in your time, leading these schools, leading presumably a lot of teachers and a lot of kids?
Yeah, well, one of my mentors shared with me when I was leaving the classroom and going into leading as a principal, and then when I became a superintendent, she said to me, think about the things you did what you were really great when you were a teacher, and always fall back on that. So the things that made you a great teacher can make you a great leader. And I was like, what does she mean by that? And the more I've reflected on that, it's the emotional intelligence, right? It's like, so whenever I teach leadership, I always start with, let's get clear on your emotional intelligence. Are you self-aware? Are you socially aware? Are you able to build relationships? And are you able to understand how you affect different people? And so I always found that the best leaders are very self-aware. They understand what they're feeling, and it's like using that information that you have about yourself to then lead others, right? How many times have you been in a room with a leader that's in a bad mood and now everyone's in a bad mood, right? So
Mm,
but yeah, so the things that teachers do really well is listeners, and they understand their people. They know exactly, like I would always say as a principal, if I walk into your classroom, I should be able to touch any kid on the shoulder and you should tell me the 5 things they need right now and where they need to be in the next 3 days. Like,
mm,
you know your people when you're a teacher. Like, you know them inside and out, and you get to know them and you're there to support them. So it's knowing your people, it's knowing yourself, it's knowing how to motivate your people, it's taking care of yourself so you can take care of others. I mean, I could go on and on, but I always say the most important leadership characteristic is emotional intelligence.
mm. What would you say to a leader that says, "Well, I wanna make sure I get close to my people, but I don't wanna get too close. I wanna make sure I have some distance there." Because if, I'm their buddy, then, well, Alex is just my friend. I don't have to listen to what he's saying.
Yeah, I think there's ways. I think that's smart, and I don't think you should become like best friends with your people. But I think there's a difference between becoming best friends and building strong relationships. So learning about their family, like you were just talking about, like talking with the people out in the warehouse and knowing about their family. You know their diet, so you're talking to them at some point. Just chatting with them, getting to know them, understanding what makes them tick, like knowing that their cousin's getting married, whatever it may be, like showing them that you care, showing them that you're invested in their future and in their growth, and you're invested in whether they show up today. It's that kind of stuff that I think that makes the best leader. It's the person that you feel like they see you and they hear you and they know you. And I would always say, I was selling history to like kids in urban schools, and they didn't care about like European history, but the reason they would do work for me is because they knew I cared about them, and I could
Mm,
actually get any kid to do anything. I know that sounds kind of arrogant, but I could actually get any kid to do anything for me because I cared about them. And I got to
mm.
know their family. I got to know what they liked. I got to know what made them, happy. What I checked on them if they didn't look like they were having a good day. I had one-on-one conversations with them. I drove them home if they needed, built really deep relationships with them. So if I said to them, "Hey,
Mhm.
I need you to finish this paper. Like you said you'd have it done by Friday and it's not done," they'd be like, "All right, whatever you need, Mr. Richards, like I got you." Because we had a reciprocal relationship based on trust and love, like, and care, and knowing that I cared about them and I cared about what their future was. And they knew that. And so then I brought out the best version of them.
That is my first point of 3 on fast track to leadership. It is build relationships with your people, build comfort to the point that if you need to ask them to do something, they'll be willing to do it. And also, if I have to come to you and tell you that something's not going great, you know that it's coming from a place of love,
Yep.
and not the only time that you hear from me is when you screwed up.
Yeah,
'Cause if
exactly.
only
Yep.
time they hear from you is when it's a problem, then they don't
Yep.
want to have 2 ways of communication, because
Yep.
every time I communicate with Alex, it's bad. So, when I need to tell Alex something,
Yes.
I'm just not gonna talk to him because he's probably
Yep.
gonna bring up something, back up something, back up something, back up something, back up something that I'm doing wrong, and I'm just gonna leave it, kinda thing.
Yep. Absolutely.
My oth my other 2 are consistency.
Mhm.
Like, you have to treat people the same way.
Yep.
Like, this happens so fast in business. Like if David, you work for me and you're allowed to come in at 10 a.m. Why? Well, he's got two kids, but everybody else has to come in at 9 a.m. Well, wait a minute. I have a kid. Well, wait, do they live with you? Well, they don't live with me, but what does that matter? People are instantly going to lose you and be like, oh, they're setting, oh, there's rules for thee, but not for me.
Yep.
People hate that. It's just such an easy thing. Just try to hold everybody to the same standard. I get it. There's going to be small fluctuations. I think people
Yeah.
will understand that. But if you make your best effort, and then I say just lack of transparency, where if you
Yes.
don't tell people what success looks like, if you're not clear with them about your expectations, if they can't predict the way that you're going to react to certain things,
Yes.
if they don't understand the needed information for them to have success, if they don't understand where the business is going, where they want to be in a couple of years, where you want them to be in a couple of years,
Yep.
people just get super frustrated about this like secrecy culture. So we're very open at the company. We talk about generally as much as we possibly can. You can't talk about everything. Probably
Yeah.
not helpful if I tell everyone how much I'm making and how much Dave's making and how much this person's making.
Yeah.
But we try to be as open as we possibly can be with everyone.
That's great. That makes perfect sense. And I feel like it's the same philosophy that I live by. And I remember reading this great book about, like them having to close. I think it's this book called Love Works. And it was about a guy who used to be a CEO, like for a big corporation. And then he became a CEO of like these amusement parks. And it was all about like joy and fun. And so he wrote this book called
Mm,
Love Works. And it's probably from like 15 years ago. But he talked about how the story of how in his previous job, they had to close like a location, like a plant or something like a warehouse. And that one of the leaders like just went in there and closed it and like fired everybody. And it was just like no care. It was just like, you're done, you're out of here, see you later. And the other guy spent like a week there. He talked to people, he gave them like a week of time to like look for jobs, ask them if he could like give them a reference. So it was like the two ways they handled the same exact outcome really
mm.
changed everything. And I feel like that's the art of leadership, right? Like going in there and actually leveraging the relationships and helping these people transition out of that closing was a very different story than the guy who just went in there and just fired everybody and they all left and they were angry.
It's that relationship, just building some care, building some comfort with your people. Well,
Yeah.
David, this was fantastic, brother. I learned so much about schools. I'm excited about micro schools. I hope they're to a town near everyone listening soon. I hope they're coming to Columbus soon. I don't have any kids, but maybe by the
Yeah.
time I do, they'll be out in my direction.
Well, yeah, for your listeners, I think there's some good, like either education savings accounts or other public funding for if someone's thinking about a micro school in
Okay,
Ohio.
cool. Well, where can people find you, David?
Easiest place is davidkrichards.com. Everything's on there. Or you could email me at david@davidkrichards.com or find me on LinkedIn.
And if someone happens to have a kid in the Phoenix area?
Oh, reach out to me. Yeah, we're opening that school in the fall, like less than a year from now. We're not this fall, but next fall. But definitely reach out to me because we're getting a lot of things set up there now.
And the same would probably be true if for some reason they're thinking, I got to open one of these. This is right up my wheelhouse. This sounds perfect.
Yeah, I have another program called Pathfinder, which is with a friend of mine that we help people open micro schools. So if you want to do your own version of the micro school, but you don't want to use the curriculum we're using, then you can reach out to me. Basically, I want to minimize the obstacles. If you're like, I'm really passionate, I want to get a micro school open in my community in a short amount of time and like get it done, just reach out to me and we'll help you with whatever you need.
David, I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.